Angel is brought to you by Audible with an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more. Get a free audiobook with a 30-day trial at audible.com/angelbook.
Hey everybody, welcome to my brand new podcast, Angel. In this podcast, I'm going to interview angel investors who I've worked with and who I'm just meeting for the first time, but who have a successful track record. The podcast has two components. In the beginning, I talk to people about their process, how they got into angel investing. And in the second half, I talk to them about their portfolio, their wins, their losses, and everything in between. These are supposed to be candid discussions. We try to be as honest and helpful as possible. Why would angel investors give up all their secrets? Why would they be so quick to share what they've learned? Well, what you'll find when you become an angel investor or you work with angel investors is that startup companies typically have a dozen or 24 investors in the early stages. Angel investing is a collaborative sport. Nobody does it alone. Everybody works together to grow a company to the point at which it could move on to the next phase, the venture capital phase. That's a phase we're not going to talk about on this podcast. We're going to talk about seed investing, the earliest investing in companies that are 1, 2, or 3 years old and are pre-venture capital. My first guest, and I'm really excited to have her as my first guest, is Cyan Banister. We've worked together on a number of startups. She used to come to my Open Angel Forum, which was a small get-together where angels invested in startups. And very famously, she invested alongside myself and a number of other lucky investors in Uber and Thumbtack, two companies that became worth billions of dollars. So without further ado, my conversation with angel investor Cyan Banister, who is now a venture capitalist at Founders Fund. Enjoy. Hey everybody, in the book I talk about all the different techniques that I use as an angel investor and what I've learned over 100 investments. When I started investing, I met a really smart person named Cyan Banister, and she was starting her angel investing career at the same time. Since that time, we've invested in probably closer to a dozen companies together. And in fact, probably two of our biggest hits, Thumbtack and Uber, we both did in our first year and our first couple of investments. So it's a pleasure to sit down with Cyan Banister and talk about her 7 years as an angel, 8 years. How long have you been doing it?
About 8 years. Yeah.
About 8 years.
Yeah.
So we both started around the same vintage, as we say. What drew you?
It was a good vintage.
It was a pretty great vintage. Yes. And we'll talk about that a bit of why it was a great vintage. But first, what drew you to angel investing? What was it about being an early stage investor that was exciting to you?
The biggest thing that draws me to angel investing is that I get to work with entrepreneurs and I can dive as deep as I want to go and then pull out. So when you're operating a company, you're responsible for the day-to-day ongoing stuff. And when you're an investor, you can dabble with that and get involved and give product ideas, but you can also take a break. So it fits my work style. And that's one of the reasons why I like it. But the other thing is that being able to back these incredibly bright, talented entrepreneurs with these visions of the future and being able to do many of them. So I've learned the hard way that I am not an operator. And, I don't want to work on one single product or single idea at a time. And this allows me to be all over the place, like from anything from space travel to sandwich delivery. I can do it all. So it's pretty fun.
And you talked about getting deeply involved and then pulling back and being less involved. How do you navigate that with the founder of a company? Do you insert yourself and say, hey, tell me what's going on, or do you wait for them to call you? What do you think is the best practice, or does it just vary by founder?
It varies by founder. I prefer to be pulled in than for me to reach out. It's just my style. I think it also works better for the founder. And so, sometimes there's an ebb and flow, as you know, to the need. And sometimes companies are doing well. I mean, when they're doing poorly, that's also a bad sign because sometimes they don't pull you in when they should. But at the same time, the best founders will leverage, my skills when they need it. And I get called, I work on it. I set that expectation, which is, I don't work at this company full time. I have a portfolio of over 100 companies, but I will come in, I will give you as much time as I can, and then I'm out.
Right. How did you, and it's very interesting now, we're sitting here in the offices of Founders Fund, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the world. You've now become a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
After
cutting
your...
right?
It is a little bit weird and surreal since we used to sit there writing 25 and 50K and 100K checks. And now as a venture capitalist at this incredibly powerful and well-known venture fund here in Silicon Valley, you're writing multi-million-dollar checks. What's the difference in the process now for you?
The process has changed because, when we're writing 25K checks, there's a lot of conviction that we have, which we can just do on the spot, which is if you and I had, as angel investors, had a belief in a company or a founder, we could just sit there and write the check and, walk out the cafe and it's done.
We're done.
Sign the paperwork. That's it.
Yeah.
Here, it doesn't work that way. It's consensus based, and we have different thresholds that require different sign-offs. And so you have to argue sometimes with another partner about the merits of the deal and whether or not it's a fit for the fund and whether or not we think it's going to get the venture multiples that we're looking for. And so that's harder, but at the same time, it creates more discipline. So I really do like that because I wouldn't say that I was the most disciplined investor before coming here.
You don't need to be as
but you
well,
don't
right?
need to be.
Yeah, if you're writing 25K checks and 5 of them don't work out and the 6th does, it easily makes up for mistakes. But here you're investing $3 million, $5 million, $10 million in a deal.
Right. And I do maybe 2 of those a year.
Right.
And so, and you've got to be sure, as sure as you can be, that, because I'm doing early stage and Series A here. And I do participate in some of the Series B and growth rounds of companies as well, but I'm not, leading those rounds. I'm not making those decisions yet, but that's the goal, in the next 5 or so years that I would be doing that. But I have a lot to learn before I get to that stage.
When you were doing, the first year or two of angel investing, how did you build the deal flow that eventually wound up with you hitting a large number of hits?
So going to events like yours. I didn't realize, by the way, that I was benefiting from you being a Sequoia scout.
Right.
So in hindsight, I look back at that, I'm like, how phenomenal was I that I was able to go to those events. But so thank you. But part of it was just putting in my time. It's one part luck and it's one part the grind, right? So I would go to every single event, every single party, everything. And, I was out every single night trying to figure out who the right people were to be talking to. And because we do have, Scott and I have sort of the PayPal mafia that we're part of through his experience with PayPal. So there's that inbound, stuff coming in. But my job for my partnership with Scott was to go out and find new deals outside of our network. And, Uber was not in our network. Neither was Thumbtack. I mean, sort of. Politically maybe, but otherwise not in our network. And, that's basically how I would find deals. It's just hard networking.
Yeah.
Hard work.
And when people find out at a certain point that you've invested in a couple of companies,
it gets easier.
Things get a little easier. You start getting people just emailing you.
Yeah. It gets a lot easier.
Or co-investors too.
Yeah. But then you have the problem of searching for deal flow and then having too much deal flow. And having to navigate that, and swim through that. That becomes a problem. A nice problem, but a problem.
How did you deal with, my gosh, people find out that you're an investor in Uber, Thumbtack, and a bunch of other companies, and now, gosh, how do you deal with, I'm getting 50 or 100 emails in a day, and I could spend all day reading them, but I wouldn't be able to do them justice.
Well, that's when I started adding a little bit of discipline, not much, but a little bit, and narrowed the scope of my investing. And so I narrowed it down to marketplaces for a while, and started saying, well, I'm not doing any hardware, period. I just don't understand hardware. I shouldn't be in the business of hardware. Now I can because I have a team. Right. And I have multiple people here who can help me evaluate whether or not something makes a good hardware investment or not. But before, I wouldn't have trusted my abilities.
Right.
And so I just started carving out areas that I shouldn't be involved in. And that helped because then I could turn away, 50% of what I was seeing. What
were the terms that you thought were important when you were doing angel investing? What do you think are the terms? When people start looking at the mechanics of a deal, were there things that turned you off to deals or things that you learned over time? I got to make sure that these red flags aren't in the paperwork and these things are in the paperwork.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me was there's this one period of the Uncap note craziness.
Right.
I'm sure you remember that. There's this period.
2014-15 vintage.
And we just, out of principle, said no to all of those. It doesn't matter how good the company was. Now, granted, we may have missed some good opportunities if we were to go look back at it, but it still was this thing that we were just no, we're not doing that. The other thing was high-resolution financing. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember that. What was that?
This was a thing that YC pushed for a while, and I think they might still be pushing it, which is every day your company becomes more valuable. So like they'll come to you and they'll say, we're raising 1 million, 4 million cap. We hired an engineer. Now it's a 6 million cap. We made this progress. We went out to the app store. Now it's an 8 million cap. And it's like every day, it's like, if you don't get it now, like the valuation's going up.
Artificial pressure on the investors. And this is one of the things that YC's been criticized about, but also the training does work with, let's say, neophyte investors where, hey, if I put pressure on them, the valuation's 4 million today, but if I get these 2 engineers on board, it's going to be 6. So you got to get in now or else the price is going up 50% the value of the company.
So I said no out of principle again to anybody who came to me with that. It was just like, absolutely not. I'm not doing that.
It's a weird way to start a relationship. Like it's having this crazy pressure that you're not comfortable with a certain way of doing business and they're trying to put pressure on you and you're just, I just don't feel comfortable with this.
Yeah, and I like a lot of YC companies.
Sure.
And I think they may have retired this practice, but I have seen it cross my path a few times in the last year and I do tell them, like, look, you either want me or you don't.
Right.
But this doesn't tell me you want me.
Right. Yeah, maybe researching the deals I've done, talking to the previous founders I've worked with, that would be an interesting way to show that you're interested in Cyan Banister. But putting pressure on me like there's a ticking time bomb. And anybody who's a good investor would want to take their time making a decision. Why would you want to rush somebody making a thorough decision?
And I used to lead more rounds, and then I stopped doing that as well towards the end of my angel investing career, mostly just because anytime that I would lead a round, it sent the signal that a lot of other angels would follow. And I was concerned that they weren't necessarily doing diligence that they should be doing. Because I didn't always do diligence. Sometimes it was, I have a really good feeling about you. I have a really good feeling about this company. I have no idea if this is going to work out, but I'm going to put in a $50K check.
Right.
And then suddenly they raised $2 million. They were the same company before I invested, and they were the same company after. But suddenly, all of a sudden, those rounds would close, and that actually gave me a little bit of fright.
Me too.
I was like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this.
It was interesting, I think, when you and I and some other folks invested in notable companies, then people said, oh, well, we'll just draft off of their diligence. We'll draft off of their expertise.
Which is a strategy, and it's probably not the worst strategy.
Not the worst strategy, but you still want to do your own diligence and have your own process.
Yeah.
And
especially sophisticated investors need to have their own process. I don't want to feel that I'm ever to blame for them deciding to back a company that I also backed.
Right.
And so I started telling people, like, you know what, I will put in 100K, 50K, but you need to go raise the first 500. And then come back to me.
I like that.
And that helped because it made me feel a little bit better. And then it also proved to me whether or not they had the ability to go raise the money. And they could still leverage my name.
Right. You're soft-circled.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they can clear market, you're willing to pull the trigger on it. Talk a little bit about due diligence. You said in the early days, there wasn't much to think about. You write a 25, 50K check. If you lose it, it's not the end of the world because you have a concept of investing $1 million or $2 million over some period of time. But then you started doing a little more diligence. What's some lightweight diligence that worked?
A simple Google search to start with.
People don't do this, right? Typing in the person's name and seeing if they have a felony.
Exactly. Like
or
doing just a little background check, looking at LinkedIn, looking at if they're at the stage at all of having Glassdoor, did they operate a company before? What did their employees think of them?
Right.
Just a simple Google search was the first step. The other thing was looking at if they had any debt, looking at the cap table.
Right.
We didn't look at the cap table early on and started doing it later just to see if there's any sort of weird founder stuff going on.
Yes.
Because it turns out that a lot of the deals we shouldn't have done, we could have caught if we looked at the ownership of the company.
Right.
And figured out where was this mystery person that has 30% of your company? Where are they? Why haven't we met them? Where are they?
We fully vested them, and they left after 2 weeks.
Yes.
And now there's 30% of the company's dead weight.
Yeah, exactly. And so
that can be damaging for a company down the road.
Very, very damaging. And
why is it damaging? Do you think?
Mostly just they end up one having this person who owns a huge stake in the company that's not helpful. And that's equity they could be giving to other people who are helpful.
Right.
It's a potential liability. What if they do incredibly well? They end up maybe even diluting that person at some point and they come back and sue you.
Right.
It's also just shows and I know this stuff happens. You might have been in the business long enough to know that founders fall apart.
Right.
They do. But it also just kind of shows that they don't know how to run the business.
Right.
From the very beginning. Like
they haven't figured out a way to settle with that person to get them off the cap table.
Yeah.
Bought back the shares or negotiated something.
Yeah.
To clean it up.
I mean, there's all sorts of unknowns that happen when you have someone with that percentage ownership. And it's just, one, they also should have vested.
Yeah, why weren't they vesting?
Why weren't they vesting?
Yeah.
It's kind of strange.
We now require people coming to our incubator in part of our diligence, we get the cap table. A lot of times they don't even have a cap table yet because we're so early and they don't have a great attorney. And then we say, well, who's your attorney? And they're like, well, my cousin's brother, sister's uncle's friend from
business
now there's
school.
So
many great attorneys that will work for equity or work and delay their payment.
Yeah, contingency.
Contingency till when they receive funding.
That you have no excuse.
There's no excuse for it anymore.
If you're here, you can get Wilson Sonsini, Fenwick, any number of people to do the paperwork. If you raise money, then you pay your 10 or 20K in fees, but you don't have to do that up front. Yeah. When you look back on your angel investing career, was there a certain archetype of founder or things you found about founder personalities that led to greater success? People like to talk about signaling. What signaling do you think makes you excited about a founder and which ones make you concerned?
Yeah, there's certain founders that you'll hear investors say, I only invest in, say, for example, aggressive founders.
Right.
But aggressive founders are only good for aggressive problems. And so I tend to see whether or not the founder is a match for the product they're making.
Founder product match.
Yes. So, for example, if you look at Brave, which is a deal that I did here at Founders Fund, it's not an angel deal, but, Brendan Eich is a very sort of soft-spoken, but personality that's very engineering in nature, and he tends to lead over like Slack.
Right.
And, have these deep conversations with people, through text.
Right.
And so some people might say, well, he doesn't have the type of aggressive leadership skills.
Not an extrovert.
Not an extrovert.
Not going to be given a keynote at the next conference.
Yeah. But if you go and you witness the team, they revere him so highly because he's at ninja level when it comes to coding, when it comes to his knowledge. Like what comes out of his mouth is usually like amazing.
Right.
When he does speak. And then, of course, anything that he says to his employees, they just eat it up. They lap it up.
Right.
So it's a different type of employee base, a different product, a different leader. So I think you really have to look at the product, and you can't say like, not every great leader fits the problem.
Right.
You could take like the best operator in the world and put them in a different product, and they won't work.
And they may wake up and just not have the motivation for that space. They don't want to see that problem solved in the world. How do you deal with that when you meet founders who you get the sense that this isn't a meaningful problem for them in the world? They're kind of working on something.
I call them out on it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do too.
Sure.
Which is sort of like, I don't really feel the passion here. I don't feel, why are you doing this?
Why?
And then sometimes it comes down to they want to make money, and that's not a good enough reason. I think making money is part of it, but I feel that you should feel, even if you're wrong, because some people think they're changing the world, but like maybe they're not quite in the ways that they imagine.
Right.
But I do think that you have to have some story there of what makes you get up in the morning to work on this particular problem, and how is it going to change things? Is it a complete shift in how people work day to day? Does that get you excited? But just like lining your wallet with more cash.
Right.
That's a motivation, but at the same time, it's not going to excite other people around you, and it's not going to make you the best person at running a company.
What other factors do you look for when you're looking at an idea? Some people seem to be very driven by the total addressable market and the market size. Other people are just obsessed with the product or the business model. Do those other strategies for evaluating a business, what do you think of those?
And they're great strategies, especially in the later stage. You have to.
Right.
In the early stage, you can come up with these, theses around whether or not you think there's going to be that product market fit or how big the total addressable size is, and you could be totally off. But once the product is more mature, it has more data, those become very, very important factors of whether or not you're going to put millions of dollars into a company, which is why people should care about their metrics early and start tracking so that when they go out to raise A's, they can just open Kimono and just show everything, which is great.
And when we started in the business, almost a decade ago doing this, people weren't super metric driven. That's a very recent thing.
It's a very recent thing.
Yeah, this is important.
It's expected now. Like
table stakes.
It's totally expected. Like when people come in for, especially Series B, and even sometimes in Series A, they have to be prepared with a data room and open it up to investors and share everything that they have so that they can see whether or not, if I give you $1, do I get 6?
Right.
Is it going to work?
Right.
So it's less about like believing in the vision in the angel days. So go back to your question. One of the things I look for is whether or not the product they're making will shift human behavior. And if I believe it will, I'm much more inclined to invest. So if you look at Uber, Thumbtack, Postmates, all of these, Manolo, et cetera, are companies that believe that if they create this thing, people will behave in a totally different new way than they ever did before.
Wow.
Which is risky.
Never heard this.
It's incredibly risky.
I've never heard this thesis. It's fascinating because for people to change their behavior significantly, it must have been some much better solution. It must be some colossally more efficient process or more delightful in some way.
Correct.
And so that's actually an interesting tell. If people get rid of their car and go full Uber and they just stop driving and they don't need a driver's license, so they start going out and drinking on Friday and Saturday night again in Los Angeles because they don't have to drive anymore, a town known for not having a really good cab infrastructure, that is a serious change of behavior.
Huge change in behavior.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's the number one question I ask myself in any pitch I have is, do I believe people will do this? And if I believe it, and if I sit there and think through it, and I can imagine that future, and I can picture it, and I can imagine it being global, not just a West Coast, East Coast thing.
Fascinating.
Then I'm like, okay, all right, you've got me.
And something like Snapchat, I could never get my head around. It's interesting because I couldn't imagine people wanting to look into their camera and make short videos of themselves all day long or watch their friends' short videos all day long. I was literally in a club and I saw two people making selfies and they had two phones. And I looked at it and one of the phones had lights, LED lights around the whole end of it, but the screen was off. So it was a phone case that was being used as a lighting rig. It was just LEDs all around the case. So they had the portable lighting rig. You have it too. I see it for taking phones. And so we're in a club and people are dancing and this light comes on and it is like a, really bright Hollywood kind of light. And the other person has Snapchat and they're dancing, taking a dance selfie. And I realized one of them's doing the lighting and she wasn't just holding it steady. She was adjusting the lighting to the other person who was adjusting the angle of their camera. And I just thought, wow, they're doing cinematography here. They're doing lighting. They've got a different angle, the shot. They're composing the shot. They're composing the lighting. They're like little filmmakers in the clubs. But so what do you do in that situation where you can't see yourself doing it?
You have to be open to the fact that even though you can't see yourself doing it, you can imagine other people doing it. So you have to have somebody like those people convince you.
Yeah.
For example, Instagram. I didn't invest in Instagram. I wish I did. But it's one of those things where I saw that people would want to make their pictures look like 70s Polaroids.
Right. Hipstamatic.
I didn't want to, but at the same time, I saw that. I was like, pictures that come straight out of your camera look like crap. And most of us aren't good at taking pictures. No. This makes them look kind of better.
Yeah.
In a weird way. And so I think that's a thing.
Right.
I remember arguing with Scott about this because Scott was like, no, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
It's not a thing. And I'm like, no, it's a thing. This thing's going to be worth billions. And he's like, no.
And if it was independent right now, if it hadn't been bought by Facebook, it'd be a $50 billion company easily.
By far, easily. Yeah. It's one of the worst early sales. Best buy from Facebook, but worst exits.
They bought it for $1 billion.
Yeah.
It would be worth $49 billion more if it was an independent company right now.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that, the exits? When you're an angel investor, you don't have control. How do you decide when to sell? And do you believe in the secondary market? Do you believe selling? Do you think angels should sell as they go a little bit if they have opportunities?
Yeah, I believe in secondary markets, mostly for employees. I think employees should be able to get liquidity early. A lot of people say that makes them complacent and lazy, but I actually think people have needs. They want a car. They want to send their kids to school. They want a house. They don't want to wait. And sometimes these companies aren't going, most of the time these companies are not going public and they're staying private for a very long time. I think that founders taking liquidity early is a very different thing. Sometimes I worry about that. And then selling, it really just depends on my life needs.
Right.
I may need more capital to deploy. So it may make sense at that time. But in general, I like to hold and I like to be evergreen. So anytime there's an exit, just let it ride.
Yeah,
and
go into the next series of investments here in Silicon Valley. It's a big advantage. All right, well, this has been amazing. And
thank you.
We're going to do a little break. And then when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about your portfolio. Hey, everybody, let me take a moment to tell you about my favorite service. Yes, my favorite app on my iPhone is Audible. I made a commitment in 2017 that I would do 3 books a month, 36 books in the year, not a book a week. That felt a little too ambitious for me, but I've been going for walks every day, trying to hit my 10,000 steps so I'm healthy, and then I'm trying to be smarter and more worldly and more cultured, and that's where Audible comes in. And Audible has a number of great features that you're going to love. Obviously, it's the largest collection of audio content, spoken word content on the planet. It is amazing, the depth and the breadth of this collection. But there are some other key features you should know about. One of them is you can change the speed of the audiobook. Now, most people don't even know this exists, but it's a feature I love because some people speak very slowly and other ones speak very fast. And depending on the content, you may want to go a little faster. And depending on the narrator, you may want to go a little faster or even just a little slower. And that really helps my enjoyment of the book. And sometimes it's just annoying if somebody's really going slow. You can do clips. You can do chapter navigation. You can take notes. I love taking notes in it because I might be on a hike. I don't have my pen and paper with me. I want to take a note. Something I've listened to is actionable. Something I'm going to bring to my startup. Something I'm going to bring to my life. I want to write it down. Boom, you just click it in the notes and it's saved forever. Send This Book is great. You can send a book to a friend or family member and they get it for free if it's the first time they're using that feature. WhisperSync, an incredible feature. You're in your Kindle, you're in the Kindle app, and you listen to the audiobook and it syncs between the two. So if you want to read for a little bit and then you're driving, it knows where you left off so you can have this great efficiency. Also, I was in my Kindle today looking at my book, Angel, and it was showing me every word I spoke. So when I was in the audiobook reading for my book, Angel, I had to get every word correct so that WhisperSync would sync it perfectly. So it took me a little bit of extra time, I'll be honest. It was hard to do as an artist speaking a book, but it was worth it for that WhisperSync. And you own your books forever. And I've now started listening to books like Good to Great a second time because they're so good and you get this little refresh, right? For your mind and for your business. So go ahead. Here's a great offer for our audience. Audible.com/angelbook, audible.com/angelbook, and you will get a free audiobook, 30-day trial membership. And you can download my book of the week. I'm going to give you 2 books. It's a pairing by the same author. There's Charles Duhigg did a book called The Power of Habit, and it's really good. It's basically how to get that habit loop started so you can be a more disciplined person, right? Self-help, it's one of the big categories. And then he did a follow-up, Smarter, Faster, Better. And it was just 2 books that will change the way you think about your own personal habits and building teams. I very much enjoyed both of these books, and I'm going to interview the author. I could give you a bunch of other books, including my own Angel, or Ender's Game, or The Hobbit, which I'm listening to with my 7-year-old, or option B, Sheryl Sandberg's new book. Homo Deus is the one I'm reading right now, which is the follow-up to Sapiens, which was another great book. There's so many great books. I'm like literally flipping through, and you can see I just have so many great books in here. I mean, it just goes on forever. And what I love to do is sometimes I take a flight. I'm worried I'm going to run out of juice on my phone or whatever. I download them all to my iPad. Now I got my iPad, my earbuds in. I'm doing work. I'm listening to an audiobook. Feels great. Okay, so I could tell you a million different ways why Audible is great, but you know it's great, and you know you want to just go in there right now, audible.com/angelbook, and get that 30-day trial membership. Download my book of the week, as we said, the Charles Duhigg collection, Smarter, Faster, Better, and The Power of Habit. 2 amazing books. Audible.com/angelbook. Thanks again to my friends at Audible. Okay, I'm back with Cyan Banister, angel investor and venture capitalist. Let's go do a little quick portfolio review. We're going to look for 3 things. the big wins. Those are always fun to talk about. Maybe some of the single and doubles, ones that sold early or were acqui-hires. You got your money back, half your money back, or double, triple. But maybe you have some regrets that they didn't keep going. And then, of course, the ones that failed that you're just wish still existed, or the lessons you learned from them. I know it's hard to talk about the failures, but let's start there.
Start with the failures?
Let's start with the failures.
Oh, my gosh.
We'll build up this time. We'll build up.
So one of my companies that I'm the saddest about is a company called Game Crush. I don't know if you remember them.
I think I do, yeah.
Yeah, and so basically it was female gamers who you paid to play games with you.
Oh my God, I do remember this.
And so it could have been Twitch.
Yes.
And it's funny because when they were in private beta, they were just making money hands over fist for like their stage. And then they got a lot of investor pressure from investors I won't name to become more mainstream and to basically get rid of those female gamers. Or at least like control their behavior on the site. And
because these were celebrity gamers, like the original celebrity.
Some were celebrities, some were not. Some were just like cosplay.
Got it.
You know, they dress in cosplay, play games with you. And it started out with like playing chess and then playing like little, certain games. But then they started doing screen sharing. And it turned out people really liked to play games with, they were lonely.
Right.
And they wanted to play games with someone. And there might be an opportunity to date someone that also shares the same interest in gaming. But because they caved to this pressure, they quickly went out of business.
And lost their revenue stream. They lost.
Yep, they killed their golden goose, is what I call it. Like basically, the golden goose was laying golden eggs, and they just shot it dead. And I really, really was sad about that one.
And that's founders listening to investors, which founders sometimes need to take that, information in, process it, and then decide that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
But not one that's actionable for us.
I never felt, maybe this is what they wanted to do too, but I never believed that that's what they wanted to do. So every time I asked them, why are you doing this? Why are you killing your business?
Right.
Oh, our major investor says we need to. And I was like, yeah, but I'm also your investor and I'm saying don't.
Right.
So you might want to like step back and see if this is the right answer for you. Like, is this what you want to do? And yeah, maybe becoming Twitch, they would have needed to become more mainstream, but there was a long ways to go before they were Twitch. Right. And they had this amazing, sticky audience that just loved the product. And
when you have that beachhead, when you have that core audience, whether it was the YouTubers originally or the people who embraced Vine or eventually who've embraced Twitch, you really want to lean into that. You want to keep listening to them and over-servicing them. They can really help define a product and become evangelists. I tell founders when they start meeting with investors or they start having 20 or 30 of them, they should just make a book. They write everything down, look for patterns, and don't let the investors cause founder pinball, which is you drop the ball into the pinball game and it just gets bounced around with it. You have one group of people saying, hey, you should make enterprise software, and other people say make consumer products. Well, both of those could work. Mm-hmm. And your approach, I think, is similar to mine, which is the founder has to find their own true North Star. They have to find.
Yes, they have to. And I learned a lot of lessons from that investment. It was a very painful, expensive mistake. It was $250K. Oh. So if you track my investments, like $250K is like
5x or 10x
a lot of conviction.
Right.
And it was also a very daring business. Sure. And that's why I like them so much. And there were some warning signs that we saw before we actually wired the money. And we refused to back out because you ever heard that the Lannister pays their debts? Well, Banister pays their debts too.
Bannister pays their debts. I like it.
Yeah. So we had this hard and fast rule that if we committed to something, we followed through even if the signals told us not to. Huh. After this, we changed that because it was like we saw the warning signs.
Yeah.
It was they held this all investor meeting before the money was in from any of us, and we saw the warning signs.
Yeah.
And we went home that evening saying, should we do this investment? Probably shouldn't do this investment, but we did the investment, which is our fault.
Right.
But, the signs were there. So we wrote down that pattern. We're like, no longer doing that.
No longer doing that. And you have to adjust, right? You have to, as an investor, going big sometimes is always an opportunity to put more money in later.
Yeah.
And if it's a great business. So the idea
you should never have FOMO. If you develop a really, really you can have FOMO of never participating, of course, but
fear of missing out.
Yeah. And if you put in some money and you develop a really great relationship and they find you valuable, then you can always put in more money.
Right. It's not like these companies ever raise one round of funding and never again. They're always going to be coming, especially the successful ones, back to the well for more capital to grow faster. All right, so now we got the most brutal one out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, the most brutal one was Ecomom.
Oh,
by far.
Yeah, for sure.
That was the most brutal one.
Yes, and that was one I passed on investing in, but why don't you tell the story? This is...
it's. I think people should hear about it mostly just because no one should ever get to the state where they feel like they need to do what Jody did, which is Jody took his life.
Right.
And to the shock of all of us.
Right.
And, again, this was another one where the warning signs were on the wall and we all didn't pay attention to it. And,
What were the warning signs with Jody?
The warning signs were sort of extreme desperation.
Yes.
And we saw that the books that were shown to us had some inaccuracies in them, and then they were sort of explained in a very strange way. We saw these signs, and he always made sense of something that was weird, always did. But sort of this desperation was a huge signal that we all thought was very strange.
Right.
Given
desperate
that
to raise more money.
Always raising money, always desperate to raise more money. And just sort of this, I mean, people have urgency, but this was a different level of urgency.
It was mania almost.
Almost mania, yeah.
And it's interesting that you bring this up. Jody was on my podcast, This Week in Startups, and I had met with him about investing, and he was bouncing around Los Angeles and all different areas, and a bunch of our friends in common had invested. And I remember when I was trying to make the decision, he emailed me at like 2 or 3 in the morning, a very long email. It was like really rambling and kind of manic. And I said to myself, this feels manic. This feels like a little too crazy. Like it was just too intense. And I just was like, I wasn't in love with the business exactly. It was, sort of an Amazon for people who are very conscious about what they were going to buy, which seemed like a great idea. Whole Foods was doing very well at the time. Obviously got sold recently to Amazon. So, but coming into it, it's a delicate balance because some founders are that kind of manic energy channeled properly is kind of the fuel for a founder sometimes, right? I mean, how do you know that kind of energy? You can't know that kind of energy, I think, is going to lead to an outcome like suicide.
Yeah, I do think, though, as investors, if we do see the signs, we should probably try to get that person help if we can.
Sure, yeah.
Because I think we all ignored them. When I've talked to other investors and other board members, I was on the board for a while, too. They all saw the signs.
Huh.
And interestingly, I was removed from the board or asked to leave the board when I didn't put in more money.
Interesting. Which is
another interesting, weird sign.
That's manic, yeah. Like to be like, oh, you're not putting more money and you have to go.
Yeah, we would like for you to leave. And then I asked him to carry a D&O, and he wouldn't.
Director's insurance, very standard.
Yeah, wouldn't carry D&O insurance. And then he said, I want to bring on a board member who's high net worth, who doesn't care about these sorts of things.
Huh.
And I was like, this is all very strange.
That's very strange.
There's a lot of really strange things that happened, and I probably should have I can't say I could have prevented it. If it didn't happen then, it might have happened some other time.
It seems like that.
But, I do think that no founder should ever get to the point where their company or their situation that they're in is worth taking their life.
For sure. And
period. All of us would have understood if he came to us and he's like, I'm in over my head.
Yeah, I'm going to shut the company down.
I'm going to shut the company down. Been like, okay, we're in the business
of shutting companies down.
Learning how to deal with companies shutting down, right?
Right. 4 out of 5 tend to shut down, right?
Correct.
And the big winners make up for it. The way I handle it is I have a conversation with founders that I say, I only have 2 requests. One, if this business doesn't work out, when you have your next idea, I'm the first person you call for your next idea. And then 2, when things get really bad and you can't talk to your board or you can't talk to your employees because you don't want to scare them or get fired, you call me. Mm-hmm. No matter what day of the week is, no matter what time is, just when things are the worst, I would like a phone call. And since I've started doing that, a number of times people have taken me up on it. I've had people call me crying. I've had people call me. One person called me after they said they puked in the shower because they had so much anxiety about not being able to raise their round. But it's not actually life and death, even though it might feel that way. Mm-hmm. Most founders hit on their 2nd, 3rd, 4th company. Mark Pincus, Travis from Uber. I mean, almost all of these people had their biggest hits later on the third or fourth company. So the idea that this one company is the most important one is just not accurate in any circumstance.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go to, on a more positive note, things that were solid wins, you know, the 5 to 10Xers or 20Xers, and then we'll end with the biggest wins.
So solid wins would be Topsy.
Ah.
I miss Topsy, though. I'm also one that I think
what it was.
May have exited too soon. I don't know, because people ask about it all the time. Yeah. So Topsy was an index of social media, specifically Twitter at the time.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to go back and look for anything that anyone said from the beginning of time of Twitter, you could.
Amazing.
And also ranked by influence.
Right.
Which was pretty cool. And there's been many, many times where people are like, I want to find this tweet that somebody said, and then they can't find it anymore.
Right.
It's gone.
Right.
So it was a very useful service, and they were acquired by Apple. And it was really interesting. Apple is so good at being secretive that they came in after the acquisition. They had an all-hands meeting. They had an executive meeting. We were out. We asked people like what they were working on, and they're like, "We're here to surprise and delight you."
It's like into these drones.
I was like, "How do they do this?"
Yeah.
So even to this day, the founders are still working there.
You don't know what they're working on.
And I don't know what they're working on.
Right.
And so when I go over to their house and talk to them, they're like, "We're working on stuff
to delight, and to please,
just to delight and please you."
Yes. Wow. It's like they've become.
So when they do M&A, they do it well.
Yeah.
And the employees are super happy when they go there. And I mean, one may argue I didn't know all of the internals of the company that it was the right time to sell, but it was a solid exit.
Yeah.
And I'm very pleased with it. And so can't really complain. Slide was another solid exit.
Sure.
Went to Google. Max is now doing another thing, many other things.
Yeah. He seems to create a startup every 6 months or 12 months. He's got something.
He's a machine.
Yeah.
So those are solid. You know, those are ones that we're very happy with. And
they pay for some of the losses.
Yeah, they pay for some
of the
losses.
They keep you in the game.
And, you know, and I'm actually happy with any exit. You know, it's a founder decision. It's very personal. And sometimes they know they can't do it. And so if they go into an acqui-hire situation or, you know, I get like 2x return, 1x return.
50%.
Yes, one could argue there was a better place to park my money, but I didn't.
Right.
And I'm happy to get it back. So, you know.
You get another swing at bat.
Exactly.
One of the nice things about it is you can place that bet again.
I get to try it again.
Right. And in the business we're in, you only need to have one hit. You have a couple of them, and the two, I think, probably ranked 1 and 2. We have the same 1 and 2s, which is Uber and Thumbtack. We both met them at the Open Angel Forum, which is just a networking event that I used to host. Take me to each of those situations with Marco and Travis and making the decision to invest. Did you think that these were going to be large businesses, and if so, when?
Did I think they would be large businesses? Yes. And when?
Like, when did it dawn on you that Thumbtack had figured it out or that Uber had figured it out? Was it just apparent from the beginning, like, this has a really good chance of being a unicorn?
Uber had a really big chance of being a unicorn, and I'll tell you why.
It felt that way from the beginning.
So I've been very negative about taxi medallions for a long time. My political leanings are towards, you know, libertarianism.
Right.
I'm not a fan of the medallion system. I'm not a fan of like the government protecting, you know, these jobs.
Yeah, indentured servitude.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is that people would spend sometimes up to, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get these medallions.
In New York, yeah.
In New York. And basically, we didn't have enough cabs on the streets, and part of it was because it was a capped limit.
Right.
Anytime you cap things and you don't allow people to enter, it's a protectionist racket, right? Like, so I already had problems with it. So when it was pitched to me, it was really interesting. The first time I got pitched Uber was by my Uber driver. He was driver number 1 for Uber, claims that he was. His name was Roger. And he said that he was 6
number ones.
I think he was one of the 6 that was number 1. And he had a small family-owned black car service, and he used to take me to the airport. And he said, you know, I don't know, I'm not an investor, but if I were to invest in anything, I would invest in this company that I'm driving for right now called Uber Cab.
Yeah, Uber Cab.
And he's like, I'm going to give you Ryan Graves' business card. You should meet Ryan Graves. And so we looked at it, and the phone number was like, Chicago or something. And the address was in Chicago. And I was like, this is really strange. And at the time, we were very, very stringent about investing in our backyard. And so this kind of like, put it away. And the next few times I got in his car, same thing. He's like, have you called Ryan Graves? No, we haven't called Ryan Graves. Why not? I now have 10 cars driving for them. And I'm like, so is the system working?
Yeah.
Like, and he's like, well, we're being paid by the hour. And I'm like, so it's not working yet.
Right. They were paying them regardless if they got a call or not.
Yeah.
They had bought supply.
So he was stoked because basically he had
Guaranteed
all
money.
these cars, guaranteed money. Every family member of his was out driving. He was stoked.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I went to the lobby. It's interesting. I'm going to bring this back to Open Angel Forum in a moment. But I went to the lobby and I met Travis for the first time.
A conference in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Held by David Hornick.
Yep. And so I went there and met him. And he was basically on the bench looking for his next thing. And it's my first time ever meeting him. And I said, when I meet people, I file away mentally, not in a notebook or anything, but like some character attributes.
Right.
And I basically said, here's an aggressive person who has a lot of gravitas. People listen to him. He's on the bench. That's interesting.
Right.
File out of way as an investor. That's it.
Right.
And I had a conversation with him that I really liked. And that's all I knew about Travis.
Right.
And so then I go to Open Angel Forum. And one of the companies that presents is Ubercab.
Yeah.
And it's him,
Right.
not Ryan Graves.
Right. And now he's the CEO.
And so I was like, wait a second, super aggressive person fighting the taxi industry. All of these, everything just started to line up. And I'm like, you need that kind of guy
Right.
to run the company.
Right. Somebody who's willing to fight with incumbents who in some
Yes,
cases are corrupt.
That is the right personality for the job.
Right.
And I'm like, I remember emailing, I have the email where I emailed Scott and I'm like, Ubercab, we need to put money in now.
Yeah.
And he was like, how much? I'm like, $75K.
Yeah.
So we offered 75. We got pushed back to 50.
Yeah. Worked out okay.
Worked out okay. But we ended up meeting with Ryan Graves because he
Right.
was the acting CEO at the time. And I really like Ryan as well. But, Ryan, I think fell into the appropriate role.
Sure.
And, did not have, and I think he would say this is safe to say, did not have the personality that Travis has. He's a much friendlier, nicer, not that Travis is not friendly and nice, but you do need to have some fierceness that Travis has.
Yeah, it's going to be a fight.
It's a fight.
It's going to be a fight in every city.
It's not going to be easy to win.
Yeah.
And in many cases, Uber made it easier for Lyft and some of the other people to operate.
Sure. They came in right behind him.
Yeah. So
they ran through. They ran through the walls, and that other people could then come through.
But that's how I knew, was you bringing him to that event.
Right.
And I wouldn't have known otherwise. I probably would have kept passing on Uber had it been this company in Chicago run by Ryan that I hadn't met until I saw Travis. And my only data point was meeting him at that event at the lobby in Hawaii and just filing away. I was very lucky to have that interaction. Otherwise, I might have seen that and be like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
Right.
Who's Travis?
Right. So there's a lot of lessons there. You got to trust your gut and
Pay attention when people are talking to you.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Don't underestimate anybody.
Exactly.
That's one of my favorites. It's just, and that, I guess that would bring us to Marco at Thumbtack.
Marco's a similar situation, actually.
Tell me.
So I met Marco at an event that was a fundraiser, a nonprofit down in LA. And his father was on the board of this nonprofit. And he came up and just said hi. He's like, hey, I've heard about you guys. I want to say hi. He didn't mention Thumbtack.
Right.
And I was like, what a bright, awesome person.
Sure.
File that away. And sure enough, I show up at your dinner again, and look who's presenting but Marco, the nice guy that I met in LA. And I'm like, huh. So I went up to him afterwards. I'm like, you remember meeting me at the Roosevelt? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, I didn't know you were working on a startup.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm an angel investor.
Well, it turns out I'm an angel investor, and you're an
Peanut butter
entrepreneur.
and
We should
chocolate.
talk.
Here we go.
Yeah. And then that one was another one. I would go to these events, and then it's interesting because Scott was kind of in the room with me. I would email him and text him everything I saw, and I described them as the open table of professional services.
Right.
And he was like, the world needs that.
Sure it does. Yeah.
And I was like, the world does need that. And so that was one of the easiest decisions we could make was, and also Marco and his team. It's funny because that is the least drama company that I have ever invested in. They just crank it out.
Put numbers up, crank it out, and there's no drama. There's no incumbent they're fighting against except for maybe Craigslist or, how do people find a painter or a piano teacher or a plumber? They go to the Yellow Pages.
Right.
I don't even have the Yellow Pages anymore. Does it
Yeah,
exist?
nobody. Well, they exist, but nobody uses it.
Yeah, it's the idea of getting a really great quote, and it's very interesting to see these companies that we invested in early on become mainstream. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've had...
It's so cool when you see like a billboard or you see...
a TV commercial?
Now, I sat at an intersection one day and counted how many Ubers went through the intersection.
It was like 3 out of 4.
It was like 3 out of 4 cars, and I felt so proud.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, that's amazing.
It's incredible.
And then I see, Amazon Fresh people come and bring me stuff, and they have the Uber sticker in their window.
And you're like,
and I'm like, oh, you drive for Uber too? And they're like, yeah.
Of course.
And I'm like, they do Postmates, I do DoorDash, I do it all. You know, and it's like, I think it's so cool that we have given people freedom in their lives to work on demand, have time with their family. This particular person had his wife and baby in the car.
Yeah.
So he was spending time with his family. Now, you may say that that's a weird way to spend time with your family, but I bet you he's pretty darn happy.
Sure. He's not like in a factory putting things on a shelf or...
They can take a break together. They can go to the beach.
Yeah.
They can have lunch together.
They may have just gotten the call on the way back from dinner and he says, oh, I can make a quick $20, $10, whatever it is, and that's going to be put towards somebody's college at some point. And I hear this all the time. People say, I drop my kids off at school, and then I drive Uber or, whatever, Postmates. And then I get to pick them up. Then I take them to soccer. Then I've got an hour off, so I do a couple calls, and then I come and pick them up and have dinner, and it's like, oh, and you previously would have had to get on the BART, go to a job somewhere, and not see them 3 or 4 times a day. It really does provide a lot of freedom. Yeah,
and that's so nice. I hear stories like this over and over and over and over and over again.
Right.
And the press doesn't cover this because if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny, one time I asked the question, why isn't there enough good news in the world that we're reporting on? It's because there's nothing but good news. There's 99% good news.
Right.
There's so little bad news that's all we hear about.
Right.
It's actually rare.
Yeah.
And so like anytime one of these companies does something even remotely tiny that's wrong, it just gets blown up.
Yeah. It's and when you're an investor who has no control over the company, you're a passive angel investor, best strategies kind of lay back, right? And they have to handle it themselves.
You have to lay back. You have no control.
You have no control.
Once you let... You ever watch Shark Tank with Kevin O'Leary?
Yeah.
He always says, I send my soldiers out to fight. The dollars are soldiers, and hopefully they come back with more soldiers.
Right. Sometimes
sometimes no soldiers come back, and you just have to be okay with that.
Yeah. All right, well, this has been delightful. And are you enjoying the venture space?
I love it. I absolutely love it.
I can see that. You seem like you're...
I'm very happy.
Intellectually fulfilled. And that's really what it's about. I mean, one of the nice things about what we do, if you think about the last, close to a decade of doing this, we get to hang out with the smartest people who want to change the world and talk to them about how they want to do it. It's pretty magical, isn't it?
It's pretty magical. I'm pretty blessed.
Yeah. How many people do you meet with a week, would you say? How many founders?
Like 4 to 5 a day. So, 25.
25 people a week.
Yeah, a week.
Who want to change the world.
Yep.
It's just like you go from meeting to meeting.
And the context shift is always fun. It's draining, but fun.
Sure.
Because you're like, okay, I'm looking at a company that's making artificial shrimp to a company that's solving...
You didn't tell me you had an artificial shrimp company.
Yeah, I have an artificial shrimp company.
Second.
It's on my list to tell you.
Oh my God, it's brilliant.
Well, I'll tell you about that afterwards.
Yes.
But artificial shrimp company to someone who's designing socks for diabetics.
They need to get socks for diabetics.
Yeah, socks for diabetics. That measures the temperature. Basically, the yarn is electronic, and it measures the temperature of your feet so they can predict ulcers.
Oh, wow.
So that it actually cuts down on the amount of amputations.
So like now being able to know about wearables. Like there's actually a market for wearables.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think wearables is going to get pretty exciting, especially when it's built into cloth.
Right.
It's when battery life is a concern or it's uncomfortable that you don't want to do it. But if you have a shirt or a jacket or socks, why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah, we're all going to have these soon where your whole body, like you'll know the entire temperature of your body. You'll know where you're sweating. You'll know electrical impulses going through your brain. It's going to be amazing.
It's going to be amazing.
They need to get Forrest Gump for that shrimp.
Yeah, the shrimp.
For the shrimp thing, you got to get like Forrest Gump. You could have Creole shrimp. You could have popcorn shrimp. You could have a shrimp fricassee. You could have coconut shrimp. I love that scene. And you and I both angel invested recently in Contraline.
Yes.
Which is doing...
I think it's doing incredibly well.
It's really interesting. Tell people what they're doing. It's a very
interesting... Yeah, so it's I think it's non-invasive.
Pretty non-invasive compared to the other option.
The other option, but it's a non-surgical vasectomy that is gel-based that is going to be reversible, and it's injected via a needle under ultrasound, and hopefully younger people will opt into it. So this is a behavioral shift.
Yes.
And I do believe that men will do this earlier in life. That right now they only do it because of it's, they're family complete. It's the option you have after you've had as many children as you want to have and you're done.
Right.
Or you decide, I'm never having children, then it's an option.
Right.
It is technically reversible, but not really.
Yeah.
Like it does.
It might be.
It might be.
And it's incredibly invasive to be snipped.
Yes.
And men are...
This is really nice because you put the gel in into the vas deferens. It blocks the sperm,
swimmers, yeah.
The swimmers. And no swimmers, no babies. And then I think that's a glorious thing.
And then the best part is, hey, if you did this in your 20s, if you went to college and said, I just don't want to risk having a baby until and then I want to plan it out, and when I'm 32, I'll get married and have a baby, and those 5 years after it, when you're ready, boom, you just do another shot. 5 seconds later, it clears out the vas deferens from whatever this material is, and everybody can flow through.
Yeah, there's lots of accidental babies in this world, and they're wonderful, and we're probably all many of us are products of accidental babies. But I also think that there's something to being planned and deciding, when is the right time in my life to have this baby? Are my economic conditions in the right place? Do I have the right partner? All of those things, I think, create a more stable foundation for children. And so I'm a huge fan of that.
Totally be better
Being able
for
to have an on-off switch. And also the fact that it's non-hormonal gives your partner, if you have a long-term relationship, the ability to not have to take birth control.
And it really does.
That's why all the females in the audience cheered when I talked about it, because they're like, I don't have to take the pill? Yes.
Well, because the pill does have the side effects that I think are...
Yeah.
And what I love about your thesis of will it change human behavior in some significant way, I think men are ready to take more control over this issue, and they would if there was something possible that they could use that would be, set it and forget it, right? Like that you could, I certainly would have done it. I would have totally done it in my 20s. Why would I ever want to risk having a baby at 20-something years old? And
so if you did that in combination with like other methods to prevent STDs, there's no way you would ever have an unwanted child. It would be impossible.
Right.
Absolutely impossible.
Right. All right, this has been amazing. The future is, it's almost like we're living in the future.
Yes.
It feels like that. It's like
we are in the future.
Uber's having the Flying Car Summit in Texas. When I saw that, I was like, it's not April 1st, right? You have to check sometimes. Okay, it's definitely not April 1st, and they're not doing it like on March 30th or April 5th. It's not in that window. It's not the April 1st week. Okay, that Flying Car Summit is real. Like literally, we have a number of friends who have invested in flying car startups.
Wow.
Is it ever going to happen, you think? That's the one I'm not sure about.
Flying cars, I'm not sure about. That is a behavioral shift that I'm not sure about. I think going in tunnels.
Tunnels, I love.
Yes.
The Boring Company.
The Boring Company, I'm very bullish on. Flying cars, not so bullish on.
There's nowhere to go but down, as Elon says about the Boring Company.
I believe in Elon, and I think that if flying cars were a thing, he'd probably be at the forefront of it.
He would. All right. Listen, Cyan Banister, continued success, and it's been great to work together over the years. And thanks for sharing everything you've learned as an angel investor. Okay, we'll see you next time.